What's up? I've said it so many times before, but I'll say it again. The best way to show your logo, your art, whatever, is to show it working in its intended environment. So today I'm going to teach you how to get your art out there on a flat surface. It can be the side of a building, a computer monitor, or the side of a box. And by the way, that's what we're going to be building today. And we're going to be doing it by taking you on a tour of the perspective tool. By the end of this video, you'll know the ins, outs, and everything in between. We're going to follow that up by giving you a little lesson on how to output your art in the best way possible straight out of Adobe Illustrator. Now, if you want to use any of the artwork that I'm using, just check the links below and it's all there waiting for you. All right, let's get started. All right, let's get started. First thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new file. Our new file will have a width of 1000 points, a height of 1000 points, a single artboard, and we'll be using the RGB color mode. Let's go ahead and create. All right, before we get started, I want to mention that we're using the Essentials Classic layout. If you want to switch to Essentials Classic, all you need to do is go to the top right-hand corner and select Switch Workspace. Once that's open, go ahead and select Essentials Classic. I use Essentials Classic because it presents all of the windows and tools that I need to build a piece successfully. Now, if you plan on using a different workspace, by all means, go for it. I'll get you from point A to point B either way. Next thing I want to mention is that we'll be using Smart Guides. To activate Smart Guides, all you need to do is go to View, Smart Guides, or select Control U. Next, notice that we're using the bottom center of our page to highlight hotkey recommendations, key command recommendations, and tips and tricks. Finally, we're building this piece on a PC. If you're using a Mac device, anytime we recommend using the control key, select command instead. Again, command equals control. Let's get started. First thing we're going to do is we're going to import the image that we plan on using. Let's go ahead and select File, Place, and then let's go ahead and select our image. In this case, it's box.jpg. Once we've selected it, click anywhere on or around our artboard to open it up on the page. Once it's downloaded, let's go ahead and center it vertically and horizontally by using our align tools. Now, if you don't have your align tools visible, all you need to activate your align tools or open up your align window is go to Window, Align, or select Shift F7. Once that's done, let's go ahead and scale our piece down by double-clicking on the scale tool. And let's go ahead and scale our piece down to 50%. I know that this piece is 2000 pixels wide and our page is 1000 pixels or 1000 points wide. So 50% should do. Once we've got that done, let's go ahead and deselect our artwork. All we need to do is grab the selection tool, click anywhere off of our artboard, and then let's go ahead and select, copy, and paste our shape. Now notice right away that while our shape is on the page, it really doesn't relate too well to the box in the background. So in order to have it fit that box's perspective shape, we're going to be using the perspective tool. So let's get started with that. To activate perspective tool, all we need to do is let's go ahead and grab our perspective tool right here. And once that's up, we'll be using the positioning pointers as shown. First thing we're going to do is let's go ahead and align the center of our perspective to the front edge of our box. Let's do that first. Right away, let's go ahead and select it and move it. The way we do that is we go to the bottom left-hand corner right here, and let's click and drag it to the left until that front perspective edge matches our box edge right there. Next thing we're going to do is let's go ahead and make sure that the top of our perspective grid and the bottom of our perspective grid matches. Now note right away that we align the top of our perspective grid to the top front edge of our box. Let's go ahead and do the same thing with our bottom. The way we do that is we go to the bottom center of our grid right there, and let's go ahead and click and drag that down until that arrives at the bottom of our box. That's perfect right there. Once we've got that set and sorted, let's go ahead and stretch out our perspective to match our box's width. In order to do that, we're going to need to zoom away from our artboard. We're going to do this by selecting Control-. Once that's done, let's go ahead and go up here to our left top guide and let's click and drag away from our shape. Notice what we're doing is we're pulling that grid to match the perspective. Now notice it's stretched out nicely. However, we need to match that vertically as well. We do that to our furthest left grid right here, and we're going to click and drag that vertically just like that. Notice as we're doing it, we're dragging that grid to more closely match our shape. Notice that we're going to need to pull it further out. Let's go ahead and adjust our artboard position. The way we do that is let's go ahead and press our space bar and let's click and drag to the right. That looks pretty good right there. Next thing we're going to do is let's go ahead and drag our perspective grid out. Looks a little bit better right there. Let's go ahead and adjust it vertically. That looks perfect right there. Let's go ahead and zoom into our artboard to see what it looks like. We do this by pressing Control 0. That looks very good right there. Notice right away, however, that our grid runs off of our surface. Now that is really not that big a deal at all. However, it's always nice to be able to know how you can impact your grid size and location. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to hover over here to this guide and let's click and drag that to the right. Once we've covered our grid, that looks pretty good right there. Let's go ahead and adjust our right side grid as well. How do we do that? Let's again zoom out. And this time, all we need to do, since we've set our grid position on the left, all we're going to need to do is drag it out to the right until it matches our shape. Let's go ahead and do that. Again, we'll select that right topmost guide and let's click and drag it all the way out until it matches our shape. Now, if we can't match the shape on its current position, let's go ahead and reposition our artboard. Again, we'll press the space bar, click and drag to the left. That looks good right there. And let's continue to drag it out until it approximately matches our shape. Let's go ahead and zoom into our artboard and take a look. Now that looks perfect. Now again, if we want to change the size of our grid, all we need to do is go to that guide right there and let's go ahead and click and drag in until it matches our shape approximately. That looks great right there. Now once that's complete, all we need to do is match and scale our shape to the constraints of our perspective grid. How do we do that? Well, it's a piece of cake. Notice that we've already got our shape on our artboard. All we need to do is let's go ahead and make sure the side of our grid is selected that matches the grid covering our shape. I've selected that. Next thing we want to do is let's click and hold our perspective grid and let's select the perspective selection tool. Once we've got that, all we need to do is grab and position our shape. Check it out. I'll click and select it and we'll drag it and notice that we're pulling it right onto that perspective grid right there. I love that shape right there. It looks pretty good. However, I want to go ahead and scale it up. How do I do that? All I need to do is double click on my scale tool and scale it however I want. In this case, I'm going to scale it up to 130%. That'll work. Let's go ahead and click OK. And that's perfect right there. Next thing I want to do, of course, is position my shape exactly where I want it. In this case, it looks pretty good. But if I wanted to reposition it, I'd use my directional keys and arrow up, down, left, or right. In this case, I'll arrow down just a little bit. Notice that as I move my shape down, it adjusts according to the perspective. Once we're done with that, let's go ahead and grab our selection tool. Let's deselect our shape. And now we want to see how it matches our shape without the perspective grid available. In order to do that, let's go ahead and click and hold our perspective selection tool. And let's select our perspective grid tool. Once that's selected, all we need to do is hover to that top left-hand corner of our grid tool and select Hide Grid. Once we've done that, let's grab our selection tool. If we need to, let's click off of our shape and take a look. That looks pretty good right there. What about the left front of our shape? Let's go ahead and do that. Once again, we're going to paste our shape onto our artboard. Once that's done, let's go ahead and select our perspective grid one more time. Note that the grid that we've set has maintained its position. Now, once that's done, let's go ahead and select the top right of our grid. Once we've done that, let's go ahead and click and hold our perspective grid tool and then select perspective selection tool. Once we've got that, all we need to do is click and drag our shape into place. Notice that it aligns or binds to that grid right there. Now, what about scaling? Now, recall that we scaled our shape to 130%. It's worth mentioning that with the perspective tool, Elements don't scale perfectly, so we're going to have to customize our scaling. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's double click on our scale tool. And then let's go ahead and scale our piece to the size that we'd like. In this case, let's take it to 122%. Let's go ahead and click OK. That looks good right there. Next thing we want to do is let's go ahead and position our shape exactly how we want to do it. Again, we'll use our directional keys to do that. Additionally, use your grid as your guide. Once you're happy with it, let's go ahead and grab our selection tool. Let's deselect our shape, and then let's go ahead and hide our grid to take a look at what it looks like. Again, we'll click and hold our perspective selection tool. Let's select our perspective grid tool, and let's go ahead and select hide grid. Once that's done, let's zoom out just a little bit and take a look at our shape. That looks really good. However, there's a couple changes I would make. The first change is let's make our artwork a little bit more real by matching the color or multiplying from the color behind it. Here's how we're going to do that. Let's go ahead and grab our selection tool. Then let's select both of our shapes. We're going to do that by selecting the first shape, holding our shift key, and selecting our second shape. Once that's done, let's go ahead and open our transparency window. If you don't see that window, all you need to do is go to Window, let's scroll down to Transparency, and select that, or select Shift Control F10. Now, once we've got both elements selected and our transparency tool up, let's go ahead and change our transparency from normal to multiply. Look what happens to our shapes. What that does is those colors multiply on the white of the box behind it. Additionally, if there are any scratches, shadows, or anything like that, the color will multiply from those. Next thing I want to do is I want to make my logo shapes just a little bit more opaque to make it more real. So I'll double click on that. I'll select 90%, hit enter. Let's go ahead and grab our selection tool one more time. Let's go ahead and deselect our shapes. And that looks pretty good. Don't need the transparency tool anymore. However, we want to make one more change. Check this out. If we zoom into our shapes, look how sharp our artwork looks compared to our box. Let's go ahead and zoom out one more time. What we need to do to make it more real is we need to blur our artwork just a little bit. The reason is because photography and our eyesight are not perfect. Everything we see has just a little bit of blur. To make it more real, we have to make our shape just a little bit more imperfect. Here's how we do that. Again, with our selection tool selected, let's go ahead and select both of our shapes, again, using our shift key. Once they're selected, let's go ahead and go to Effect, Blur, Gaussian Blur. Now, once we select that, we can change our blur to match any of our needs. Of course, we can drag our blur way up to 80 and look what happens to our shape. They become completely blurred out. On the other side, if we drag our radius all the way down to 0.1, there's almost no blur and we're back at the place that we started. Now, in this case, we're going to go back to our default radius with Gaussian blur, which is 2 pixels. That'll work just perfectly. Let's go ahead and click OK. Let's go ahead and deselect our shape. And again, let's go ahead and zoom in to our piece. Notice when we hover off of it, take a look at the blur surrounding those shapes. That looks good and that looks photorealistic. Let's bring the whole artboard back into view and let's hover off of our shapes to get a better look. Now that we've got that set, we've got our box set, our logos on both the left and the right side of our box, and with that, we are done. All right, I take that back. We have to figure out how to export our piece. Now, the low-hanging fruit, of course, is you could just select File, Save, and then save your piece as a PDF. Let's cancel that. That might lead to a bloated file that's difficult to email on the fly. So what about exporting an image? That's easy. All you need to do is have your selection tool selected, and we can either click and drag across all of our shapes just like that, or hold our shift key and select the individual shapes until everything is selected. Once that's done, all you need to do is hover over your piece, right-click, and select Export Selection. Once that's selected, notice that the Export for Screens pops up. Now, once your export window pops up, we've got a couple things to do real quick. The first is to select our export location. All you need to do is click on the folder box right here and then select your location. In this case, notice that I've selected the export test folder inside my documents folder. I'll select that folder. Next thing I want to do is I want to look at the checkboxes below it. Notice that I've selected open location after export. That gives me a great, easy way to proof my exported file before sending it. I don't need to create subfolders because that tends to complicate things for me. However, feel free to do that. The next thing you want to do is you want to select your formats or your different scale formats that you want. Now, of course, you could add scales here to have multiple different export formats. In this case, though, I want to export a single file. The way I do that is I select my format dropdown right here, and I'm going to select width because I want to export at 1000 pixels wide. That makes it nice, uniform, and easy to transport and to open. Next thing I'm going to do, if I wanted to add a suffix, I can certainly do that. That will be named asset1, and then you'll have your suffix prior to the format extension. Generally, when I export a file, I export it as the highest resolution JPEG that I can. In this case, it's no different. I select JPEG 100, and we're ready to export. Last thing, all I need to do is select Export Asset. And once that's open, we've got our exported file ready to proof and ready to send. Let's go ahead and close that folder. Let's deselect all of our shapes and our box, and there you go. And we now know how to create a piece with flat perspective and export it. And with that, we are done. All right, now that we're done with that, take a chance and go out and place your art on an image of your choice. Use the perspective tool and see how it works. All right, by now you know the drill. Comment, like, subscribe. Happy to answer any questions. Show some samples along the way. There you go. We'll see you next time. Peace.